Disclaimer, I'm going to spoil the plot of all these movies. It doesn't really matter because they all stink, but you have been warned. The challenge I gave myself is simple. Draw fan art of a movie that has a 0% Rotten Tomatoes score. Shouldn't be too much trouble, right? Homecoming from 2009 is a very bland horror thriller centering on an obsessive ex-girlfriend holding her ex-high school boyfriend's new girlfriend hostage in a feeble attempt to win him back. It's misery without anything that makes that story interesting. The film has a cheap, shocking opening scene where a distressed woman hits another woman with her car, which seems to only be placed in the beginning to add pointless intrigue, because the exact same scene happens later in the movie. The distressed woman is Shelby. She's the crazy ex-girlfriend. The woman she hits with her car is Elizabeth, the current girlfriend. And Mike is the man they are both in love with. He casually worries about the whereabouts of Elizabeth, while his family seems completely unconcerned about the fact that the girlfriend they were supposed to meet has not made an appearance. The movie's main problem is that it suffers from everyone has brain damage syndrome. The circumstances leading up to Shelby hitting Elizabeth with her car, then holding her captive in her creepy old house are so dumb. Basically, Shelby gets Elizabeth drunk, which leads to Elizabeth insisting she stay at a motel to sober up so she doesn't embarrass herself in front of Mike's parents. Mike's cop cousin Billy drives her to a motel, immediately leaves. He doesn't stay to make sure she gets a room, and of course the motel is full because it's homecoming weekend, which is a big deal in this small town. Elizabeth steps outside for literally 1 second, sees her cell phone has no signal, and when she knocks on the motel office door, presumably to ask to use their phone, the guy at the desk locks the door and turns off the light inside. Rude. This is why Elizabeth ends up walking on the side of the road and ends up getting hit by Shelby's car. What follows is a series of scenes cutting back and forth between Shelby torturing Elizabeth misery style and Mike being mildly concerned that Elizabeth's not answering her phone. I think what bothers me most about the whole movie is how dismissive everybody around Mike is about the fact that his girlfriend disappeared. His parents don't seem to care at all. Billy, the cop, is even worse. When Mike expresses his worry about the whole situation, he says, "What are you, ovulating?" That's a direct quote, because the guy caring about his girlfriend is totally gay, bro. Meanwhile, Shelby tries to plant seeds of distrust in both Mike and Elizabeth about each other. She tells Elizabeth that Mike was an asshole and that she broke up with him, and she tells Mike that Elizabeth keeps mentioning her own ex-boyfriend and even tells him that she doesn't love Mike. But none of these things seem to have any impact on Mike and Elizabeth's relationship in any meaningful way, and Mike outright rejects every single one of Shelby's advances. Neither Mike nor Elizabeth fall for Shelby's mean girl trickery, and when they're reunited at the end, there's not even time for them to talk about it because their main concern is not being killed with an axe. Oh, also, it's heavily implied that Shelby poisoned her bedridden mother. It doesn't really matter that much because we already understand that she's a sociopath. If we didn't have this information, nothing about the plot or Shelby's characterization would change. The movie's drama is so uninteresting that I start asking nitpicky questions like, why is Shelby's house so old and run down? And how did she expect to build an addition on that house when she's not even paying her bills? And also, why isn't she paying her bills? Why doesn't Elizabeth scream for help when the banker comes to visit Shelby? This was even before she was bound and gagged. And why are most of the screenshots on this movie's IMDb page of Shelby in her sexy underwear? I think the most egregious part of the movie is the ending. Basically, Mike realizes what's going on when Shelby gifts him a jacket with his old jersey number that Elizabeth was originally going to give him. He notices Elizabeth's initials embroidered into the sleeve and puts it together that Shelby was involved in Elizabeth's disappearance. He runs to her house, finds Elizabeth, and after a struggle, Elizabeth manages to beat Shelby to death with Mike's old football helmet. At least that's what it seems like, but then after Mike and Elizabeth escape the house, we see Shelby lying on the floor. The movie then shows old home video footage of Shelby and Mike at their high school prom with nostalgic and sentimental music. Like I'm somehow supposed to care about Shelby's feelings after she kidnapped and cut the Achilles tendons of the woman her ex-boyfriend is now dating. Then we cut back to Shelby lying bloodied on the floor and she opens her eyes like she's Jason Voorhees or something. Cut to credits. It's so dumb. I finished the movie feeling numb and bored. While it's not the most incompetent film ever made, it certainly deserves a 0% score for being so derivative and uncreative. For my forced fan art, I tried to portray a more campy mood than the movie actually has. Shelby is in her sexy underwear about to commit an axe murder, while Elizabeth lies helpless and injured. Meanwhile, Mike is looking kind of bored, wondering where his girlfriend is. Constellation from 2005 feels like the first draft of a script. It's so disorienting and yet so boring at the same time, which I never thought possible before. And it's not like the premise is bad. In fact, it has more potential to be interesting than Homecoming ever did. The film starts off with its central character, Carmel Boxer, who is a black woman in love with a white man in the 1950s, I think. You can tell they're in love because they stand and stare at each other a lot. She monologues about life and love and the struggles of an interracial relationship in the time she lives in. Kind of. The racial aspect isn't explored all that deeply, which is one of many missed opportunities in this chaotic and disjointed script. Anyway, Carmel marches straight into a war camp to say goodbye to her white boy lover, whose name completely escaped me. It was Bear Korngold. Yeah, she fell in love with a guy named Bear Korngold. Anyway, they stand and stare at each other for an awkward amount of time before one of Ben's superiors yells at him to fall in line. He goes off to war, then Carmel gets assaulted by 3 white guys. It's a jarringly edited scene, and the only aftermath we ever see of the assault is her broken pearl necklace. So then Carmel writes letters to Bear while he's at war, and he stares blankly at them. We barely get a taste of what Carmel was like as a person before we are thrust 50 years in the future, where her relatives and loved ones are gathering for her funeral. What follows is several scenes introducing a million characters to us who constantly switch between talking about how great Carmel was and interpersonal drama. Billy D. Williams shows up as Carmel's younger brother, Helms Boxer, who doesn't go to his loved ones' funerals, whose daughter had to lie to him about the date of the funeral to get him to show up. Then we get a white guy and a black guy hanging out, and the black guy mentions he went to Kenya and saw that men hold hands there. This is never brought up again. Side note, the Kenya flashback has P filter on it. Just had to mention that. Then there's an old white guy and his daughter. Oh no, it's his niece. They're just having dinner somewhere else on the planet. I don't know. Then back to Helms' family having dinner. Then Zoe Saldana shows up, and I mistook her for Jada Pinkett Smith because I watched this movie on a low resolution and they look very similar. So in my notes, I kept calling her Jada, and I'm an idiot. Please forgive me. So anyway, Zoe Saldana meets the guy who went to Kenya, and it turns out they used to date, and they stand and stare at each other and make painfully awkward conversation. Cut back to Helms and his family having dinner. Cut back to Zoe Saldana, whose character's name is Rosa, and she's having dinner with her mother, who Helms had an affair with. So Rosa is also Helms' daughter and is half-sisters with Helms' other daughter, who we met first in the movie. And Rosa's ex-boyfriend, the guy who went to Kenya, is now having dinner with them, and her mom is mad that she broke up with him. Then we get back to the old white guy, who I finally figured out is Bear Korngold. Ugh, that name. And now he's monologuing to himself that he always loved Carmel, but he was too much of a coward to ask her to marry him because we lived in a different time, or whatever. Back to Rosa's family dinner. Her mom is drunk now. Now Helms is sleeping, sitting up, and dreaming about a funeral? His own funeral? Cut to young Carmel talking about deep stuff. Now Bear Korngold's niece is talking to the guy who went to Kenya. I think they used to date or something, and they have a conversation about toothbrushes. Cut to Rosa reading for 2 seconds. Cut to Helms' daughter arguing with her white husband about having babies. Cut to Rosa reading again. Now the guy who went to Kenya is waxing poetic about Rosa's body, and now Bear's dreaming about Carmel, and now the 2 half-sisters are fighting, and now Helms is picking up an order of paint that Carmel had asked the shopkeeper to prepare for when he visited. Turns out he didn't even visit her when she was still alive. Okay, I need to stop. The basic rundown of the plot is, it's an exploration of the impact of the death of a person on their loved ones, and it's also about Helms learning to be less emotionally constipated. But in the midst of all this petty and disorienting drama, all I can think is, I want a movie about Carmel. She's a poetic and intelligent person, a black woman in love with a white man in a time where interracial relationships were heavily frowned upon. She's dispensed all kinds of wisdom and love to her family. It would be nice to watch a movie about her and her life, and how she develops her philosophies through her experiences. It would be nice to watch a well-written and acted love story between two people of different racial backgrounds living in the midst of a bigoted society. All we get of her and Bear's love story is brief scenes of them sitting on a couch and staring at each other. Don't get me wrong, a script about just the family drama happening around her funeral with her benevolent specter looming in the background could work, but it did not work here. There's so much dead air, clunky dialogue, jarring cuts between scenes, too many characters, and so much standing and staring. Just in case you were wondering about the ending, Helms does in fact show up to Carmel's funeral, and he gives Rosa, the daughter from his affair, Carmel's pearl necklace, which he restrung. Yay! Character development. And of course, they stand and stare at each other and hug. The end. Credits roll. Well, that was an ADHD nightmare. What makes this film so terrible is that it could have been good. It was just written, paced, edited, and directed badly, hence the 0% score. What is there to say about Redline? Well, for starters, it isn't the hand-drawn anime film of the same name that came out 2 years later and is one of the greatest pieces of animated cinema ever. No, it certainly is not that. Redline 2007 is more akin to the Fast and the Furious movies, and I dislike it for most of the same reasons I dislike the Fast and the Furious movies. There are too many characters, all of which are underdeveloped, and anytime they're not inside a car, I'm on pins and needles, waiting for the action to start already. Then when the action starts, my brain goes numb. They're also similar in that most of the women exist as props for the background, and as accessories for the male leads. I know the Fast and the Furious has female characters in it, but Redline has a female main character, so that's different. Her name is Natasha, and she's gorgeous, and she and her mother run her dad's garage. Her dad died in a racing accident, and she's in a band called Moving Violators. Oh no, they suck. Before her plot begins, the movie introduces us to the key players. Infamous, a music mogul and avid gambler. Michael, an eccentric crime lord, wannabe hippie guru, cult leader, and avid gambler. Jason, Michael's nephew and a skilled racer. Jerry, a movie producer and avid gambler. And Carlo, Iraqi war veteran and Jason's brother, who doesn't want him to work for their uncle Michael because he's a bad guy. So what follows is Infamous trying to get Natasha to race for him because she shows him how fast she can go when she takes his new car on a test drive. Natasha refuses because her dad died racing, and she eventually ends up getting pressured into it anyway. Meanwhile, Carlo is trying to get his brother Jason to stop driving for their uncle Michael, and their conversation before the first big race serves as some very subtle and good foreshadowing that Jason is for sure going to die. And he does, via car going so fast that it flies and flips over and explodes. It's really hard to try and recount everything that happens in the movie because it's way too much and not in a way that makes the drama compelling. Kind of like Constellation. The movie feels very of its time, also, not just because of the whole objectifying women thing. There's all these quick cuts and shots of flashy sports cars and constant butt rock playing in the background. It's trying to be the sleekest, coolest thing ever, and yet my eyes are glazing over. I don't ask much from action movies. All I want is exciting action scenes and characters that I care about, or at least are interesting. Because if I like the characters, the action becomes that much more impactful. And there's nothing wrong with attractive women in a movie. I like that, but I also like for them to have agency and for them to be treated with dignity. And for my taste, Redline has very little interest in doing these things. I'll give it this. Natasha as a character is about as surface level as any of the others. She's good at racing and wants to race, but she can't because dead daddy. Carlo is a war vet, and he's a good boy who holds doors open for women and jumps to Natasha's defense when a creepy guy hits on her at a club. Jason is dead. Infamous likes to gamble. Jerry likes to gamble. Michael is a creepy weirdo. I think he's supposed to be funny, but he isn't. Oh, also he likes to gamble. See? Equality. Natasha also gets kidnapped by Michael, who professes his creepy, desperate love for her despite not knowing her at all, and she gets to stick it to him at the end of the movie, where she purposefully loses the last race so Michael loses his bet and has to liquidate all his assets. And then he gets killed by some British mobster or something, so all is well in the end. I see a missed opportunity in this movie. Shocker, right? Natasha seems to have a good relationship with her bandmates. Something that's not important to the plot, but it is something I noticed while looking for a reason to care about the story. After Carlo starts a fight with the creepy guy in the club that hit on her, you can see her bandmates lead her away from the scene, abandoning the girls they were flirting with so they can take her to safety. When Natasha is injured in the race that killed Jason, one of the bandmates immediately calls her mother to tell her what's going on. And it's this same bandmate that tells Natasha she should race for herself and not anybody else. If I were writing this movie, I would have made Natasha and her band the central emotional focus. We could get to know them and their motivations, learn their names. They could all get involved in the action in a more direct way. Maybe each member can play a key role in the big race at the end. Maybe their music could also play a bigger role in the plot. Oh, okay, forget I said that. As it is, Redline is a noisy mess, made exclusively for horny teenage boys in the 2000s. My second watch through of this movie killed my good mood, so I'm going to watch the better Redline as a palate cleanser. My forced fan art of Redline 2007 is a lineup of Natasha and her boys, the bandmates that were sidelined in the movie proper. I guess I ended up making fan art for the version of the movie I wish existed. There's a plethora of bad shark movies out there, and it's all Jaws' fault. I haven't seen a shark movie aside from Jaws that was worth watching. I don't understand why people keep making these. And even among the bad shark movies, Dark Tide 2012 has to be one of the worst because it's so boring. The movie isn't scary or suspenseful, it just puts me to sleep. It's about Halle Berry being a free-diving shark whisperer, as in she swims with sharks outside a shark cage, which seems like a great idea. Nothing bad could possibly happen from that. Basically, the plot follows her overcoming her trauma of losing a fellow diver to a shark attack by taking a British millionaire and his teenage son, who he bullies constantly, into shark-infested water so they can swim with the sharks. And they do. And it goes badly. And that's the whole movie. The pacing is glacial, and for no reason either. There's so little going on in this plot, and yet the movie is 2 hours long, and it isn't until there are 25 minutes left that the storm hits the boat and the sharks start attacking people. The characters are so shallow and uninteresting that even after spending over an hour with them, I felt nothing as they were torn limb from limb by sharks. I mean, how do you mess up a thriller about sharks this badly? The movie starts with a shark attack, and there's no shark attack until the movie's almost over. The interpersonal drama in between doesn't endear me to the characters. It just wastes time. I don't know why they didn't pepper in more suspenseful scenes earlier on, like having the boat break down, the storm hitting them earlier, maybe a couple close calls with sharks. Then when the climax happens, it feels natural and exciting and upsetting. I think the only earnest compliment I can give the movie was that it was filmed semi-competently. The main takeaway is that there's nothing narratively or artistically remarkable about Dark Tide. It's an anemic movie, and that is the worst kind of bad. I like bad movies that give me something to talk about, that have interesting ideas, or crazy, stupid surprises. This movie doesn't do that. It just sits there and does nothing. The Disappointments Room from 2016 is a haunted house movie with Kate Beckinsale. She plays Dana, an architect and mother who has lost her baby to sudden infant death syndrome, and is moving into a spooky house in the woods with her dorky husband and their kid. While exploring the house, she finds a creepy secret room in the attic that isn't on the floor plan, and she hallucinates for about 40 minutes. Then after she almost kills her kid with a hammer, they leave the house, and the movie ends. This is probably the most empty horror movie I've ever watched. It feels unfinished. Normally, in a haunted house movie, there's a slow escalation of supernatural activity, and after some horrific things happen to major characters, they manage to vanquish the ghosts or demons or whatever, or they barely manage to escape the evil house with their lives forever changed for the worst. This movie does this about halfway. Dana has some horrific nightmares, and she finds out the purpose of the Disappointments Room. It was where a wealthy family kept their deformed child isolated from the public eye, which apparently was a real thing that people did before the turn of the century. History is fun. Then Dana starts having hallucinations about the family patriarch who killed his deformed child with a hammer. Then, after Dana attacks her son's pillow, thinking she's defending him from this phantom, finally her husband says, "Maybe we should leave," and they do. The implications of this abrupt ending is that Dana still hasn't resolved her guilt over the death of her second child, and the ghosts are still in the house. Sorry, people who are going to move in next. Anything else in the movie that doesn't have to do with the haunting is completely thematically irrelevant. There's a whole scene where Dana and her husband and kid go into town to get groceries. The shopkeeper is a friendly southern woman who talks their ears off about how friendly the small town is, and she immediately assumes that Dana's husband is the one who's going to fix up their house. But then Dana surprises her by saying that she's actually going to fix up the house. There seems to be almost a statement about gender roles going on here, because Dana is the breadwinner with a technical job while her husband handles more of the child rearing. But that's as far as it goes. It has nothing to do with the haunting and has nothing to do with the concept of a disappointments room. There's also another character that has no point. He's a local contractor who is young and attractive, and he shows up at the house uninvited to offer Dana help with fixing up the place. He also flirts with her, but she shuts him down real quick, and then he gets killed by the father ghost. What was the point of his character? He and Dana don't have an affair, he doesn't act as a foil to Dana's husband, and he doesn't tie thematically to the haunting either. He's only here to get killed and have his body hung from a tree to be shocking. A good psychological horror movie thematically ties the main character's pain with the supernatural happenings, and this movie doesn't do that. The only relation the death of Dana's child has to do with the haunting is that she died on the same date that the child in the disappointments room was killed, which turns out to only be a coincidence with no other implications. Dana's child wasn't deformed, there was no societal pressure to keep the child locked away from the world, her family isn't wealthy and affluent, she accidentally rolled over the baby after falling asleep. That is not at all the same thing as deliberately caving in a child's skull with a hammer. The point I'm trying to make is, the disappointments room is a complete failure on every front. No wonder it got such a terrible score. I also have to mention that this movie has a cute kitty in it, and it gets killed. They killed the kitty. So there you go. Worst movie. Bad. Shame. My fan art is pretty basic. It's just Dana being watched by the creepy ghost man inside the disappointments room. What else was I supposed to do with this? I had so much trouble finding one last movie to talk about. My original plan was to watch and review the 2002 Pinocchio movie, where Pinocchio is played by a balding middle-aged man, but I couldn't find its original Italian dub streaming anywhere. I couldn't find its English dub either. The one place I found to watch it had its French dub, and the English subtitles weren't timed correctly, so that was a bust. I tried another 0%er called Max Steel. It's a generic superhero origin story based on some Mattel toy I'd never heard of. I watched it and decided I had nothing to say about it. So finally I tried one more time, and I found it. The perfect bad movie to end this video with. Killing Me Softly is just what I was looking for. This is the kind of bad movie worth watching. It's an erotic thriller from 2002 about a woman named Alice who leaves her boyfriend because she meets some random hunk on the street and immediately has sweaty, passionate sex with him. Seriously, they just met and they're already breathing heavily on each other and rolling around on the floor, ripping each other's clothes off. It feels like a parody of how asexuals view allosexuals. Anyway, this hunk is named Adam, and he's an expert mountaineer who is the subject of a recently released book about his heroic rescue of 6 people during an avalanche. Worryingly, this is the only thing Alice knows about him before deciding he is worth leaving her boyfriend for. After an indeterminate amount of time, Adam proposes to Alice after beating a man's head in for stealing her purse, and she says yes, enthusiastically. No red flags here. Their honeymoon is pretty funny too. They leave the wedding, walk through a graveyard, and Adam takes a naked picture of Alice next to an angel statue before they both get dressed in hiking gear. Adam leads Alice to a cabin in the middle of nowhere where things get a little 50 Shades of Grey. From there, life is great. Alice keeps getting mysterious notes warning her that marrying Adam was a huge mistake, and when she goes snooping through his stuff, she finds letters from another woman trying to break off her affair with him, and she finds out that this woman disappeared 8 months ago. So she's dead. Definitely dead. Adam finds out she snooped, and he ties her to the kitchen table with rope. Then he cries about her not trusting him, and I'm like, dude. He lets her go, but she very wisely decides to run away to the police. Turns out they can't do anything without any evidence. Typical. So she runs to his sister, who agrees to help her. It turns out she was the one sending the letters, and then it turns out she's also a violent freak who had sex with Adam when they were teenagers, and now threatens all his romantic partners because she's jealous and wants her brother all to herself. Ugh. Yeah, this movie is bonkers, and that's why it's the best. Of all these horrible movies, this is the only one where I laughed a lot and was engaged with the story, just waiting to see where it was going. On top of the craziness of the plot, the dialogue and acting is hammy, and I got a good laugh every time I saw Adam's face. And I have to point out this hideous dress they put Alice in this one scene. Like, what is this? Velvet? Clearly doesn't fit her right in the bust area either. And what is with the stupid fuzzy shawl thing? It looks like a Party City costume. Anyway, if you don't mind some ridiculous sex scenes, then this movie is perfect for a bad movie night. And if you don't have bad movie nights, what are you doing with your life? Out of all the pieces I did, this one is my favorite. I think feeling some amount of investment in this bad movie really helps the quality of the ironic fan art. Here's the happy couple, with Alice tied up in the pink silk that she was choked with on their honeymoon, and I had Adam wrapping himself around her like he's a spider and he just caught Alice in his web. What I learned from this whole project is that a 0% is what you get when a movie is so lame, so boring, so uncreative that it's not worth thinking about. Though there is clearly one exception. Killing Me Softly belongs in the same camp as The Room or Jiggly or I Know Who Killed Me. And yes, I've seen all of these. They are insane. I believe in a healthy balance of watching good films with actual artistic and cultural merit and movies that break your brain and question how a human being could make something like it. But with boring movies, it's a lot more difficult to get something out of them. I think that people who make movies like this are just uncreative and incurious. They probably haven't had a healthy and varied media diet. So if you want to make art, you need to consume a lot of different kinds of art. Read all kinds of books, watch all kinds of movies, go outside, touch some grass. And please, no more shark movies.